come Sunday, because it's in the prayer book. And so, but I thought it would be interesting if we could, the reason it's by the way, the reason it's in there, that the reason they have all of the entire chapter, which is one of the longer readings they have during the Christian year and on a Sunday, is because even in 1928, when they put together the 1928 prayer book, people weren't coming to Good Friday services. So the compilers said, well, the guys put together the lectionary said, well, they're not going to get this unless we give it to them on Palm Sunday, which they got to show up for. So that's why it's there. But I thought that if we read it and we went through it almost line by line to get an understanding of what essentially it all means, because it's so packed with stuff, again, that it's you can go line by line and there's something in it that I didn't know. We would be when the time comes for the Palm Sunday service, and we'll be sitting there listening, although those of us, you and me and Dale, will be reading, but they will, we'll have, it won't be it's kind of like this, but, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's what that meant. So that's what I thought we would start. Now, it begins, of course, with the chief priests and the elders of the people. And they decided that at this point they had decided, now, this is right after Palm Sunday. And one of the reasons that they've met, and it met right after this happens, is because of the excitement that Jesus created when he comes into Jerusalem. And when they talk about Palm Sunday. Initially, they say, well, he's as we remember from our own services in at the beginning of the Eucharist. When it says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, right? Hosanna in the highest. That is a quotation from the Old Testament. But that's not exactly what the quotation says. The quotation says, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. And blessed is the Son of David, who of course was a king. And it had always been believed that when the Messiah came, he was going to be a son of David, and he was going to carry on the Davidic kingship and bring the kingdom of Israel back. And so there were two Messiahs that they believed in, the Jews believed at this time. One was a kingly Messiah. This was a mortal. This was somebody who was going to come and restore the kingdom of Jerusalem, kingdom of Israel, which had not been the same since the days of Solomon. And the person who was going to do that was somebody who was a son of David. They had to be a line connecting all the way up to David. And if you look at Psalm 110, Psalm 110 talks about what this king was going to be like. The Lord said to my Lord, put your enemies under your feet. I will put your enemies under your feet. And that was going to be the king who would restore the kingdom of Israel. At the same time, you were going to have a Messiah who was the religious one who was going to bring around about the end of the world, which might not happen at the same time, but was certainly something to be expected and was something that had been prophesied. So when Jesus comes in and the authorities, particularly the Roman authorities, hear that hear that quotation, which Matthew alters slightly. Every one of them knew, the Romans may not have, but every one of the chief priests and the elders and such would have recognized that quotation and known that it was a reference to a Davidic king coming to restore the kingdom of Israel. And as I've talked about for weeks now, there was a very tenuous existence and understanding between the Romans and the Jewish authorities at this point, because the last thing that the authorities wanted was for the Romans to get upset and then totally take them over. It was bad enough that they were stuck with a Roman governor, not quite a governor because he was one rung down, and so that their authority was taken away. They didn't have like a tetrarch, like Herod Antipas, but they were stuck with this Roman. It was bad enough that it would have been even worse if the Romans directly took over that whole area and gave them no authority whatsoever. And so they don't want, there were lots and lots of insurrections at this time. There were reports from the Roman law scrolls about, hello Betsy, a huge number of executions, mostly for insurrection. And almost all of these people who did it were revolting against the Romans because they wanted to restore the kingdom of Israel. So
Maccabees?
What's that?
Maccabees?
Well, the Maccabees, of course, are a couple of hundred years, about 150 years earlier. But they would have read that part and recognized that just as they did that to the Greeks, Antiochus and Seleucus, they could do it to the Romans, and the Romans said, "No, you're not." And the Rome, again, as I have said, Rome didn't much care what went on in the internal affairs of these countries, these provinces, as long as they got their taxes
And behaved.
and behaved. Well, that was right. As long as they behaved, because they didn't want to. They didn't care about the internal politics of anything. They were happy to have some sort of organization running it, but anything that interfered with their getting, one, the taxes, and two, this part of the world had a huge amount of grain. You see in the movies and anything how arid it all was. Egypt was one of the biggest contributors of grain to Rome at the time. And so the last thing that the authorities wanted was something that would stir up the Romans and make them clamp down even more than they were currently doing. Yes.
I just wanted, has any scholars or has anyone offered a view as to how large a crowd would have followed Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday? How many people are we talking about?
Well, if you look at a map of Jerusalem, it wasn't that large. So, and I think I may even have a map of it here. And so, in trying to get, it wouldn't have needed to be that many people to make it look large. Let's put it that way. And so if here, I'll show you. There was Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah, and with narrow streets and all, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Once you pass that route,
Sure.
so. And so so you would, if anything that was of any considerable size, less than 1,000, I would imagine, would have been enough to clog the streets and make people nervous. So that's why they called this emergency meeting the next day. What are we going to do? We don't want the Romans to get. We don't want the Romans to get stirred up here, and so we're going to. We want to tamp down on this, and and again, if you were, a number of us have been in large organizations and organizations that are, groups that think they're in charge. And when there is a problem, the first thing they think of is remove the problem. And in this case, the crowds are looking to Jesus as the new king, and even though he himself was not looking to himself as a king, as a temporal king, so they figure, well, then if you just remove him, then there won't be a problem anymore. So that's why they met, and they said, okay, we're going to have to get rid of this guy. And so how are we going to do this? And then conveniently, Judas shows up. And there are, in the other Gospels, they say that Judas was that the devil had gotten into him. Whatever reason, they had decided, he had decided that he would sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Now, the word for a piece of silver is essentially in the Greek would have represented the Roman coin, the denarius, and I'm trying to see, and they gave it to. I'm trying to see if they have tria canta agordia, and not helpful. 30 pieces of silver. But anyway, whenever they mention a coin which is silver, they're talking about a denarius. I wish I had them, but I used to own a denarius, a Roman coin from that, not from that period, a little bit later, but it represented the pay that the average working man would have made at that time. So if we figure that minimum wage is, well, let's call it $10, it would be between 80 and $100. So it would be about $3,000 was what they paid. They said, okay, we'll do that. And it kind of shows the separation of the ruling authorities from the people, that they had to have Judas identify to the soldiers and to the and to what essentially were the temple police, who he was, because again, you're dealing with a fairly small country. This guy has been wandering around and talking to people, and yet you had to get one of his followers to identify him. So let me grab this one since they're still passing that around. But hey, Marty, yes, can I have my book back, please? I just want to check something out. Thank you. Thanks, Bessie. Okay, so how we're going to do this, right? Well, here we get into questions of law. And my copy of the Bible here has an excellent discussion of the law that was around. And so there were two ways that somebody could be executed. Two ways. I mean, there were two legal approaches. Let's put it that way.
Paths.
I'm sorry?
Paths.
Paths. Let's call it that way. Yeah, that'll work. So, one was the religious one, and that was reserved for things like blasphemy and adultery. But the ways that the penalties for those, the penalty was death, and the method of execution was stoning. And hence, if you remember in Acts, the beginning of Acts, when of the stoning of Saint Stephen, because he was blaspheming. The Romans, the authorities couldn't really go to the Romans and say, we'd like to have an execution. We'd like to execute this guy, and Pilate would have said, okay, what reason? And it will blasphemy. And but you took away when we had a Roman prelate appointed over us. The temporal authority went to him. In other words, Pontius Pilate. And he was the only one who could pass who could make a decision whether capital punishment could be carried out. And he would have been reluctant to interfere and to use his authority as the Roman prelate to execute somebody who had committed a purely religious offense. And so they had to come up with some other reason that they were going to, that Jesus committed a capital offense and could be executed. And the reason they came up with was, of course, insurrection. See, they said, Jesus is setting himself up as a king. Listen to what the crowd said. The crowds were referring to a quotation, a prophecy about somebody who is going to be a king. You can't do that. Hence their comment, there is no king but Caesar. Now, does anybody know who the Caesar was at this time? Too early for Claudius.
Vespasian.
Too early for Vespasian.
Augustus.
Too late for Augustus. Okay, between us, Vespasian and Augustus, between Augustus and Claudius, there were only two others.
Nero came later.
Nero's after Claudius.
Later. Caligula's later.
Caligula, you're down to one. It's Tiberius.
That's right.
And Tiberius actually was not a bad city. He was an assistant, shall we say, and heir apparent to Augustus. And if I remember correctly, was his adopted son.
I was gonna say son-in-law.
And so he had he had been trained well. Now as he got older, he became very paranoid. And there's an excellent discussion in Robert Graves' book I, Claudius, talking about how he could see kind of his mind was deteriorating. But when he started out, he was pretty good. He was the one who, when they came to him, when the complaints reached him about the method of taxation and how the taxes were, collection of taxes were done in Judea, where they essentially auctioned off the right to collect taxes. And that as long as the Romans got paid their bit, they didn't care how much was actually collected from the people. So if I wanted to collect the taxes and it was 100 denarii or whatever, as long as the Romans got their 100 denarii, they were happy. But I would bid against a bunch of other people for the right to do this, because I could then charge an extra amount on that, make a little profit. Well, as you're bidding it up, of course, it becomes more and more, and you got to get that money from somewhere, so it comes from the people. So to collect to send 100 denarii to the Romans, you're maybe collecting 150 from the people, and this caused, understandably, a lot of discomfort. And Tiberius thought that was not a good thing, and so he got rid of it. He said, we'll collect the taxes directly, and we're not going to. We are no longer going to allow it to be auctioned off. Now, I've often wondered, as we know, at least according to tradition, Matthew was a tax collector, and he gives it all up when he was at the booth, and he gives it all up and goes and follows Jesus. If this was around the time when Tiberius was making his reforms, he might have been out of a job, and maybe it was an easier decision than we think for him to have done that. That's not something that is anywhere recorded in anything that I have seen.
Or maybe he believed that was the hand of God.
And perhaps it indeed it was. I mean, those of us who know Virgil, for example, and I'm looking across the table at you, in Virgil's 4th eclogue, he talks about the Savior who's going to come, and C.S. Lewis says it may have been a pagan writer writing it, but that doesn't mean, and he may have even had somebody else in mind, but that doesn't mean that when God was inspiring Virgil at this point, he had Jesus in mind. And so it could very well have been. I mean, God, if one path closes, God opens up another door, right? So that could well have been. So when they, as we get back to the text again, when Jesus then is taken to when he was arrested, and he's arrested not by the Romans, in the Garden of Gethsemane, but by the temple guard.
Yeah.
And that's when they take him to Caiaphas, who was the chief priest. All that was like a help me out here, Article 32 in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's been a long time. And Article 32 investigation, where you gather up the evidence and you make a determination about whether or not there is cause to send it to trial before the governor, and not unlike a grand jury, where the grand jury determines whether or not there's enough evidence for an indictment. And I think that was what Caiaphas is trying to get enough evidence to go to Pilate and say, look, this guy's says he's going to be a king, and therefore you've got to do something. So the chapter in the second paragraph begins with talking about Judas, because Judas then turns around and he says, wait, I made a terrible mistake here. And he goes back to the authorities and throws the money at them, and then goes out and hangs himself. And if you look at Acts, there is a much more graphic description of what happened there. And then the authorities take the money and say, what are we going to do with this? We did this for as a betrayal. It's blood money, and so we can't put it into the treasury, because the temple treasury is only for good money, I guess, so to speak, for contributions from alms and oblations, as they say in the service. And so we're going to have to do something with it. So they bought a field where strangers would be buried. And so and sort of that's the last you hear of Judas, at least here, right? Then what happens, of course, is that they take him to Pilate, and this is really where it really differs between Matthew and some of the other Gospels. I asked you whether or not was Matthew the most detailed of the four Gospels in discussing this. And anybody have a chance to look at the other Gospels and make that determination?
Well, they're all detailed in different ways.
Right. Which one's the longest?
Luke details in his perception from being a doctor.
Right.
He draws out the picture of the suffering and how that affects the body.
Right.
John brings out things that nobody else knew, or filled in the gaps, I should say, between the other things that weren't said, and he was an eyewitness.
That is true.
So I don't
And
know whose
so-
was longer.
Well, his probably if you count it by verses and chapters, it's probably John. Now that I've got you on the hot seat here, Suzanne, which ones of the gospel writers would have been eyewitnesses?
John.
And we know that how?
And
Peter.
Woman,
which ones of the writers would be, well,
no, but John is
Well,
instructed.
Matthew.
Well, yeah, right, but no, I'm just saying, let's start with John. How do we know that John was an eyewitness?
Because he was instructed by Jesus
Where and when?
To take
on the cross.
To take care of the mother.
Right, to take care of his mother. So we know that if that is if that is indeed John, it's described only as the beloved disciple, right? He's never mentioned what his name is, and it does say, you know, that he took her into his own home, because again, as we've talked about in previous of these sessions, a woman without any support was
In trouble.
they probably was looking at a death sentence of her own. And she couldn't work. You know, there was nothing she could do, and that was important. So yes, we know that to John. So what about any of the others?
Well, I like Luke, simply because of the two crucifixes, the two thieves who were crucified.
So you think that because of the detail that he puts in there, that Luke was an eyewitness?
I'm thinking that he's better better eyewitness than Matthew. Matthew supposedly is an eyewitness, but unless Luke made up, which is perfectly possible, that business about the two thieves, one thief said this, the other thief said that, then if they was true, then that was proof of an eyewitness.
An eyewitness. Does it necessarily have to be Luke himself, or do you think he could have got it from another eyewitness?
I have no idea.
Well, there were some people who believe, of course, that Luke represents the recollection of Mary, who certainly was an eyewitness.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible.
Yes, Luke was the one that was close to him.
Yeah, that he got that, just as the discussions at the very beginning of Luke, when he talks about all of these things that happened to Mary, are likely to have come from her as well. So that, I mean, it's a little ambiguous there. You really can't tell one way or another. He doesn't say that he was there. There's no reason to think that he wasn't one of Jesus's original followers.
Yeah.
So he would not necessarily have been hanging around Jerusalem at the time. So what about Mark?
He was too young, wasn't he?
Well, he was a young man, that's true. And do you recall, in Mark, it is, let's see if I can find it there. It is, should be in chapter 14, verse 51. Mark 14:51. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. And it does not mention it. They said this incident is recorded only in Mark's gospel, leading many commentaries to think that's Mark himself. So he might not have been an eyewitness to the crucifixion. In fact, if he were about to be seized by the guards and had to run off naked, he probably isn't coming back. You know.
Peter denied him 3 times.
So that's right. Peter is, but that's at the Gethsemane, and then he disappears.
Or he could have followed them along.
Or he could have. It just doesn't say. Matthew never says that he himself was a witness, and the fact that of the brevity of it, without the detail, it may indicate that he had picked up a bunch of this from Mark, and was not himself an eyewitness. So likely, the 2 eyewitnesses. The only eyewitness to the 4 gospel writers would have been John. And that when Matthew is discussing this, he is discussing this from secondary sources. Why does it matter? It doesn't really much matter. Although it does show how fearful that they were at the time, that when they scattered, because their leader had been taken, and they would undoubtedly be afraid that they were on the list. And again, Peter himself indicates that when the young woman says to him, "I recognize you by your accent," which is probably not a Jerusalem accent, some sort of a rural Galilean accent, and said, I recognize by your accent that you were one of them, and he said no. He is near enough, Peter is, that he can be that he goes to the tomb on Easter Day. So it's not, if he did flee, he didn't go very far. So the reason that that is interesting is if you want to get the story, the most detailed story, you probably go to John. But that this is probably, this may be Mark's recollection with the one thing that Matthew would have done himself, which is to add prophecies. And because that was very important to Matthew, to a certain extent, the story is less important than how it fulfills the prophecies. So Matthew takes it takes the kind of the bare bones of the story, and then throws in a couple of things that are prophetic. And so for example, in 27:9, it says, "Then was fulfilled," always a good sign that he's about to come up with a prophecy, "what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah," which, by the way, in the I find interesting, in the prayer book and in the King James, the prophet Jeremy, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price on him whom a price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord had directed him." And it's actually Jeremiah and Zechariah. And it is and again, it is Matthew saying, "Here, look, see that this is what they were talking about." And so Jesus then goes before Pilate. Now, little background on Pilate. Pilate, when you see this kind of detail and names and things like this, of course, you think, okay, perhaps this existed. All right. And it adds evidence, historical evidence, to that possibility. Is anybody familiar with the discovery that the Italian archaeologists made at Caesarea in 1961? So, I wish I had a board here. They had do it this way. Excuse me. So, they discovered a bit of a monument, right? And it said, for Pontius Pilatus. and it is material evidence of his existence. Now, what's also interesting is that the name Pontius is not a Roman name. It is a name for one of the ethnic groups outside of Rome. And I'm reaching back to my days in college, because I remember one of my professors telling me this. If it had been a Roman name, it would have been Crucifixion and not Pontius. It showed that he was some sort of a territorial, shall we say, and probably from one of the territories that Rome took fairly early on. But what it meant was he was almost certainly not from. He was not from the senatorial class. If you were a governor of one of these territories, you came from the senatorial class. Caesar, who was governor of Gaul, they were senatorial class. The governor of Cyprus was Cicero. And various parts of of the governors would have come from the highest class. If you were a foreigner like this, you would not have been. At best, you would have been the middle class, the equites. It would be the equivalent. If you look at English history, it would be the difference between being an aristocrat, a duke or an earl or something like that, and being a knight. And so one of them got to sit in the House of Lords, and they got to make pass the laws, just as a senator got to sit in the Roman Senate. The next group of people, the equites, did not, just like the knights, didn't have that. The best that they could do was they could become, they could have been a tribune or involved in the assembly of the more common people. The Pontius Pilate was one of the equites. That meant he was not a governor, but it meant that he was a prefect. And the way they used to run the system there, and a comparison with one of the companies I used to work for, but is if you were a professional, if you were somebody like Caesar or Cicero, you did one stint as the governor of a province, so you get the box checked on your resume when you got back to Rome. Caesar went to Gaul because it was important for him. If he was going to get raised to the highest level, he had to have a reputation as a good governor. And it didn't hurt that it was an unsettled area, and he was he conquered it. If you remember the first triumvirate in the Roman period, which was, right, and who's the third?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, it's Pompey. Gnaeus Pompeius.
Nice.
And Pompey, in fact, the three people were running essentially running Rome at that time, and the Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Pompey, by the way, was the one who originally invaded and took over the Palestine, and it was yeah, right, the first Roman, and the Crassus, who desperately wanted to rise to power as well, was a very, very wealthy man. He needed a conquest, so he took off after the Parthians and came to a very bad end. There was one time, you had to serve a stint as a consul, were the two people who essentially ran Rome at the time and reported to they worked with the Senate, and but they were the ones that were in overall charge of Rome and its territories. And there was, and this is an aside, but during Caesar's, I believe, his first consulship, it was a second consul, the name of which nobody ever remembers. And it is referred, because he was so thoroughly dominated by Caesar, that it was referred to as the consulship of Julius and Caesar. But to get back to Pilate was, first of all, he's the only, you still have the tetrarchs, Philip and Herod, who are in this territory as well, but now you've got this Roman here, so he's the one in charge. Because he is not a senator, and again, this is my own opinion based on political political experience. Because he was not a senator, he likely felt a bit uncomfortable about his position. So when I was at the Defense Department, I was all of the politicals that I reported to up the chain were all Ivy League, and I went to DePaul, and it was understood that if you wanted to rise to the top, you would either be Ivy League or you come from one of the military academies. And so the same way, if you wanted to get in one of the highest levels in Rome, you needed to be a senator. Pontius Pilate was not. He was hoping that as a career guy, which is really what he was, he would move from one to another, each one higher than the last. And so it was once he finished with Judea, maybe they would have given him another one that was a little better. And the other thing was that most of the Roman governors and prefects were incredibly corrupt. A bunch of the tax money went into their own pockets. Cicero was considered unusual because he didn't line his own pockets with the spoils of the land. To all intents and purposes, although Pilate was in many ways a weak man, he was not certainly as corrupt as the rest. Again, that may have been because he was a career guy, and this was not his only, as he hoped, his only tour of duty. He would go on somewhere else. Where if he were Caesar, after Gaul, he wasn't going to go anywhere else. Where else? Either going to send him to Germania? Nah, probably not. Send him to Greece? Maybe. No. It was kind of one and done. So you better get as much money out of it as you can. And so Pilate, though, is essentially an administrator. And we all know people at that level who are afraid to make decisions. And that was what Pilate was. He was a man who was afraid to make a decision, so he kept he kept trying to give Jesus a way out, right? So then he could say, he said, well, there's nothing here, which he did say, because, but it was determined that for the safety of, the safety of the country, so to speak, they had to, and to protect themselves, they had to get rid of Jesus one way or another. And that's when they say to him, to Pilate, you are no, if you don't execute this guy, you are no friend of Caesar. And the last thing Pilate wanted was somebody to go to Tiberius and complain that he wasn't being effective in keeping control of this unruly province, and that he might have allowed a major insurrection to take place. That's a good career ender right there. Even today, what is one of the biggest criticisms that they level on mayors? That they didn't, that they didn't keep the peace, that you couldn't walk the streets at night, and all sorts of things. That's the same kind of thing. If you have any ambitions, even to stay in the same position, you'd better keep the peace. And that was what he was faced. That was what he was faced with. So he says. He then says, "All right. Let's see if there's another way out of this one." And in fact, he was the one who created the idea that you would release somebody to the crowd. That was Pilate's own idea. That at Passover, he would release, they release one person to the crowd. And he thought, well, if these crowds are following Jesus, then I can be, they'll want him to be released, I can live, and then I've wiped my hands of the problem. But that's not the way it was done, because they packed the crowd. And they all said, no, we want Barabbas. And finally, this is here, where you remember what happens here, right? Right after this, I think of it in 21st century terms, like who gave him a call? But his wife sends him a message. And anybody recall what she says?
In a dream, I was told to let this guy go.
Right. Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for came to me in a dream. Now we know all about dreams in Matthew. If you go all the way back to Joseph and his dreams, the three that he has, the first one saying, Mary, Mary, because she's okay. The second one saying, get up and flee, because they're coming to get you guys, and go to Egypt. And the third one saying, come back, because they're all dead. So dreams are very important, and they were also important to the Romans. Not only to, so if it had just been, if this were just one of these traditions, religious things, religious tradition for the Jews, Pilate's wife, who was presumably not Jewish, would have discounted it. But the Romans, took dreams very seriously. Anybody recall where Calpurnia says, I had a dream, don't go out on the Ides of March to Caesar, and he clearly she reports that to Caesar, and he listens to her, because dreams were something that the gods sent you. And Pilate's wife may not have been a Christian, although there's some tradition that she later became one. But Pilate's wife might not have become a Christian, or maybe not have been a Christian at the time, but she understood the importance of dreams and what that meant. So, anyway, you know, Pilate tries to punt it. It doesn't work. Now he's stuck. And so so that's when, of course, he stands up and says, I'm washing my hands of this, right? And there was a quotation which is caused no end of problem over the centuries, which actually comes from Lamentations. And it says, his blood be on us and on our children. And that, of course, has been used by centuries, to promote anti-Semitism. See, it says in the Gospel of Matthew, that you guys said this, and therefore it is we can keep doing to you what we have been doing to you for centuries. And but it has and there were certainly examples in the Old Testament of the sins of the Father being visited upon the Son. If you look at David's sins and his son Solomon, and then of course the loss of, or the division of the kingdom of Israel into Israel and Judah. But that was something that by this time was pretty much gone away. The sins of the Father were not to be visited on the sons. Otherwise, because why should it be? And but that has again been that has represented a terrible difficulty over the centuries, and in my opinion, it is based on a misunderstanding of what that line means. Because I believe that Matthew, you have to understand that Matthew, of course, is trying to convert, writing this for Jewish Christians, and which is why he has all the prophecies. Why would he include something in there saying, because of where your background is, you're as guilty as all the rest of them? That's not a great recruiting argument. And I must admit, I have not really understood, not really, it is, but this commentary says it's a reference to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so that is the expungement, as you know, of the destruction of the temple and the scattering of the people all over the world. And so that is probably a better argument than certain governments and certain churches have had over the years. So when then there's a discussion in some detail about what they did to prepare Jesus for the crucifixion. I'm not going to get into the literally gory details of what the techniques were for scourging somebody, but suffice to say that when and Matthew has it just one line, Simon of Cyrene is drafted to carry the cross, which, by the way, would have weighed about 40 pounds. That was because Jesus is so weak from loss of blood and from his, from the damage that to his internal organs, that he physically would not have been able to carry them.
Plus he was up all night too.
Yes, that's right. He was up. Clearly, he was also up all night. That is very true. Anyhow, so then they, then they go and it just Matthew very says, and bringing in the prophecies again. They talk about they crucified Jesus, and it says there were two robbers that it was one on the right and one on the left, and that's all they say in Matthew, just that there were two robbers. A lot of discussion about the meaning of that word in Greek, and there were so it's in verse 38 and 27, and it says less of it. The word is lestai, and that it is it merely means criminal. In others of the gospel, they say a bad person, but this this does literally mean it means a criminal. And it is some people would like to say that they were insurrectionists, revolutionaries. What does your translation say, Doug?
And thieves.
Two robbers crucified with him, one on the right, one on the left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, You are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God.
Well, there are 24 examples of that word in the New Testament and in the Septuagint. And all of them can mean robbers.
Mm-hmm.
None of them are likely to mean insurrectionist or revolutionary. So so they get to what it says here in 45. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. Anybody know what time the 6th hour is?
Noon.
Right. It's because, of course, the day starts at 6 in the morning. And in a hot climate, you wanted to get your work done early.
Mm-hmm.
So and this of course is all happening within a very short period of time. So all of the stuff that takes over, when Pilate is talking to Jesus, this is probably what we would consider to be the middle of the night. So they were pretty much done with their day by noon, which is why Pilate said, "No, you don't hear about him anymore. He's gone. He probably went home. His day was done." And so from the 6th hour to the 9th, which is of course the hottest time of the day, and this according to when they talk about it at this point, they talk about the darkness coming over the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people have suggested that it was a solar eclipse, but there wasn't one at the time. And in fact, they say it took, it says that they took, that it was probably around, it was the 3rd of April, 33. So if it was not a solar eclipse, it was clearly something that they were not expecting, which and so the temple was the curtain of the temple was torn in two. I'm reading from 51. And the earth shook and the rocks were split. This, by the way, there were earthquakes in the area. So that would not have been unusual to have an earthquake, but it must have been significant enough that people noticed, and otherwise it would not have been recorded. And then they talk about, which I found fascinating, because I think this is the only place in the gospel that says it, where the tombs were opened and the saints wandered out on the streets and and talked to people and so does anybody know what also happens at this time?
Resurrection.
Well, it's, Jesus has just died, so he's not necessarily going to have,
Yeah.
but this is the harrowing of hell.
Oh, okay.
This is when all of the Old Testament figures, the saints, from the Old Testament, people like Moses and Adam and the prophets, who had been in limbo, all of a sudden they are drawn up to heaven. And so Dante talks about that, he's having, in the Inferno, he has a discussion with Virgil. And Virgil says, yes, at one point, somebody came down and took all the souls of the virtuous pagans, the ones who were, and brought them up to heaven. And so that is what happens at this time. And it is consistent with, right, as we say in the creed, and he descended into hell. And that's what he's doing down there. He is grabbing the souls of Adam and Moses and Elijah and all those and taking them up to heaven. So I am not 100% certain that is Protestant theology, but I know it's Catholic theology. And then after Jesus dies, well, first of all, I want to say, Jesus says, makes the comment, Eli, Eli,
lama sabachthani,
lama sabachthani, which is Aramaic. Could be Hebrew, because the first two words are could be Hebrew or Aramaic, but since they could be both, the whole thing is likely to be Aramaic, or was whatever he said, it was translated into Aramaic by by whoever was there. And this is an interesting question. Why is Jesus saying, God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why does he feel forsaken by God?
If Jesus is going to die, he has to die.
Okay.
Okay?
And so how is that God forsaking him?
Well, that God would not let him die, that would take him up to heaven, etc., etc. No, you are there for a purpose, and you have to fulfill that purpose.
So you have to die as a human,
Yes.
in order for it to be fulfilled.
It was his human part probably that was speaking.
And that's probably, that is likely to be the case. It's a difficult passage, but yes, it also is it helps us with our understanding that Jesus was fully human and fully divine at the same time.
Yeah, his human part had problems with it, whereas the godly part could be
Right.
accepted.
And surely, because he does ask God, could you pass this on to somebody else?
It hurts.
And before when he is praying, and it says, if it's your will, I understand, but
This isn't fun.
this ain't fun. Because I know it's going to happen. And so the final thing I wanted to be, the two things I wanted to talk about, because we're running out of time and I apologize. One, of course, is Joseph of Arimathea, and I threw this question out to you. Where, Joseph of Arimathea takes the Holy Grail and goes to England with it. And my question is, where in the Gospels does it say that?
In the Gospels?
Yes. Where in the Gospels does it say that that Joseph takes the Holy Grail and goes to England?
No.
It doesn't.
It does.
Betsy? So that's got to be a tradition, because I don't think there's anything in the Gospel to say, in fact, that he takes the Holy Grail to begin with. It's another.
They take the cup from me.
Right, but how does it get to Joseph? We don't even know that he's at the Last Supper. In fact, he probably isn't. It's Jesus and his closest disciples. And Joseph is, which leads to my next question, how is it that Joseph knows both Jesus and Pontius Pilate? And I know you gave an answer.
Yeah, basically, he's rich and so he's connected.
Right. In both. I mean, he was a member of the Sanhedrin. And so, as a member of the Sanhedrin, he would have been known to Pilate, probably spent a lot of time talking to him. But he was also, it doesn't say how he became a follower of Jesus, but he was. And so he asks for the body of Jesus from Pilate. And we recall from last week that this is similar to the followers of John the Baptist asking Herod for the body of John. And he puts it into a tomb. And I don't think, no, it doesn't have it here. The tombs were like called the chamber tombs, and you hollowed them out, and there was a small room that was on the side, and then it was. And you put you put the body in, then you rolled the huge rock in place.
And then you left the body there for about a year
Right.
or more, and then it could go into an ossuary.
That's exactly right. Yes. Which, by the way, the Mycenaeans did as well. Not the ossuary part, but they would leave it in there for about a year, and then they would also dump lime on it. But the reason they put the rock there was that to keep animals from coming in and
Desecrating it.
right, and taking bits and pieces of it away. The last paragraph here in the thing talks about the guards, and that reads like something that was stuck in there later. It reads like, well, there's a story floating around, and we should probably dispose of it. And so it talks about the guards being paid off. You know, and if those people, those among us who have been in the military know what dereliction of duty will get you. So they, you know, they ran away. You know, when the angel came, they ran away, and so they were probably terrified not only of what they saw, but what would happen to them for that they could be accused of dereliction of duty, the penalty for which is probably fairly severe. But they were reassured, you know, we won't do anything to you because we don't want this story to go around. And if it turns out, and here's some money anyway to keep your mouth shut. And that, of course, is Matthew addressing a rumor that went around that they themselves had moved the body, and that they themselves had had stolen it, and how they could have done that by themselves is another question that's not addressed. So we will leave it here before we get to the resurrection. Now, we had not we're not meeting next week because it's Holy Week, but we can pick it up again in for the week after if you'd like to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think we're pretty much done with Matthew, except that what I would like to do is for us to read the 4 different versions of the resurrection in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so we can discuss how they differ. We can discuss what emphasis they make on these, and what they include, but what they don't include. So if that is amenable to all of you, we will meet again in a fortnight's time.